Today, middle week of the school holidays, so it's one of our all-in services with families and so forth. So we're doing our. I was going to say we're doing our teaching differently, but we're actually going to do our learning differently today. So this is kind of, some of you are already nervous because whenever we do something differently, it's like, I know. So what we're going to ask you to do, we're going to do it in two sections. We're about to jump into section 1, and I am going to need someone, because we're going a little bit old school. I am going to need someone who knows how to operate a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker. So I'd do it, but I'm left-handed, and if you know anything about whiteboards, when you write left-handed, you just rub it out after yourself. So plus you can't read my handwriting. So I'm looking for a volunteer who can help me with that a bit later on. So these three lovely volunteers down here, just down in front of you there is some pages. Do you want to distribute those out in the congregation? That'd be great. What you're going to receive, I need you to get in groups of 3 or 4. What you're going to receive is today's Bible reading from Nehemiah 10. And as you would remember, for those who have been journeying with us through the book of Nehemiah, the first half of Nehemiah is about the rebuilding of the walls, the physical part of rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. And the second half of Nehemiah is about the rebuilding of the people of God. And so what we've got here is passages, scripture from Nehemiah 10, starting at verse 28. And we'd love you, if you've got your children here, to be engaging with them, reading the text. And the first exercise that you have to do is that in that Bible passage, there are more than 10 promises that the people of God make to God. And so what you need to do is you need to read through that passage and you need to highlight what those 10 promises are. So this is a conversation. This isn't an individual task, okay? So I expect to hear noise as you chat with one another and work out what those 10 promises are that are made there. So feel free to move around. You don't have to stay where you are. Draw closer rather than yelling across the room, and have those conversations. We're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'm going to need someone who knows how to operate a whiteboard marker to help me. So, yeah. We'll do it. Thanks, Margie. Yeah, give Margie a round of applause. You can have a chocolate at the celebrations, because I celebrate you for doing that. So this is the feedback session. This is where you get to pass on one of the promises that you noticed there, and some of them are quite long. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work, Margie, just to condense that down. I'm sure you'll be good at that. So quick tip: if you get in early, you get the easy ones, and then as we progress on. So who wants to go first? No one. Oh, over here.
They promised to carefully follow all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord.
All of them. Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. Cool. All right.
To obey the law of God.
To obey the law of God. All right. Who's got another one? Eugene?
That they won't sell anything on the Sabbath, and they're going to refuse to buy it, any merchandise or grain.
Yep. So no shopping on Sunday, essentially, right?
Yeah. Promise not to let our daughters marry pagan people or our sons marry their daughters.
All right. Eddie?
There's judgments and statutes.
There's judgments and statutes. All right. This section's been really quiet over here, so I'm coming this way, so hang on.
They promised to obey the commandment to pay the annual temple tax of 1/8 of an ounce of silver for the care of the temple of our God.
All right, so paying temple tax. Anyone like temple tax? Tax at all? No. Okay. Anyone else down here? I've got a couple of hands back here. Someone's eating their chocolate from earlier.
We promise to bring the first part of every harvest to the Lord's temple year after year, whether it be a crop from the soil from our fruit trees.
Thank you. All right. Other hands. How many we got, Margie? 7. Oh, Kevin.
We promise. No, does it say promise? No. It doesn't say promise, but it says we agree to give God our oldest sons.
Sorry, Tim. Oh, is he the eldest?
He is the eldest.
Right. All right. Anyone else? Samuel.
We promise not to neglect the temple of our God.
Not neglect the temple. All right. Any other hands? Oh, Eddie's got a hand up again. You guys are just trying to get my steps up for the day.
And it says, and that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons.
All right. So no intermarriage. Oh, back over here.
And we promise to bring to the Levites 1/10 of everything our land produces, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes of in all our rural towns.
All right. Bring the 10th of the harvest to... No, it's different. It was what? Oh, first fruits. Yep. How else are we going? Any others? There's one about wood. There is one about wood.
There's one about casting lots to determine who's going to bring wood to burn on the altar. Yes.
Yes. It was a commitment of the people, right? They drew lots so the families would know when it was their turn to bring wood to the altar. Maybe we should do that with children about their tasks around the house. Like, get them to do that.
The one about the trading on the Sabbath day, they're not allowed
Yes.
to do that?
Yep, we got that one. What else we got? Yep.
We'll store the produce in the storerooms of the temple of our God and bring our best flour and other grain offerings.
Yep, bring the best of their flour and grain offerings and store it in the temple. Getting close to getting them all. Any others up there? Oh, Deborah?
To give God the firstborns of our herds and flocks.
Giving God the firstborn of herds and flocks. All right. Okay. So, these are the commitments that the people were making to God because they were recognised that part of the journey that they'd been on as a people, part of the reason they ended up in exile was that they had forgotten about how to be the people of God. Thanks, Margie. And so these were some of the things that they agreed to. And of course, the first one, carefully follow all the commands and regulations of the Lord our God. It's a pretty big promise they were making, isn't it? To do that, to almost reset and kind of go, this is what it means to be the people of God. And then they came back with specifics about, no selling on the Sabbath, not marrying, intermarriage between other countries and other people and so forth, paying tax for the temple, because that was a big part of it. They'd neglected the house of God because for the Jews, the temple in Jerusalem was where God lived. And so the idea of looking after the temple and making sure that everything was there, bringing their best to God, reflecting that they were trusting God for all things that came there. One of the other things that they had on there was that they would cancel all debt after 7 years. Every 7 years, they agreed to cancel debt that was owed. And how many of you have been farmers or are farmers or done gardening? Every 7 years, they would rest the land. That would mean not harvesting at all, not doing any work on the land, but just allowing the land to rest. How many farmers think that's a good idea? You're kind of retired, right? But this idea of kind of trusting God in the midst of that, but the underlying value of letting the land rest was also allowing those who didn't have a source of food to be able to take from the land as well. that the farmer hadn't necessarily sowed the seed, so it wasn't theirs, and others could help themselves to that. So these were the commitments of the people as they looked at what had been rebuilt, the temple, the walls, the city was being established again, and this is what it looked like for them to kind of go, this is what it means for us to be the people of God. Coming back to the idea of trusting God, obeying God in all things, and that they would be distinctive from the nations around them by how they lived and how they placed God in the first place. I'm going to invite the team back up. They're going to do another couple of songs for us, and we're going to come back and we're going to unpack a different text around how do we reflect what it is for us to be the people of God today in that. So you can be pondering that a little bit, and then I'll do a bit of an introduction, and we're going to have another conversation and get some more feedback there. So part of God's plan with the nation of Israel is that they would always be a light to the nations around them. That was God's desire, that the people of God, the children of Abraham, that they would live in ways that other nations would see them and go, I want what they've got. That was always God's desire. What we see through the journey of the Old Testament is that there were moments when the children of Israel were like that, and there were moments when they weren't. And so we see a cycle of blessing and then not blessing happening for the children of Israel as they go through those cycles where they honour God and they reap the blessing, they prosper, and then all of a sudden they go, oh, we're awesome. Do we really need God? And then they drift off, and then all of a sudden they find that they would, suffer God's judgment because they weren't upholding their part of the bargain of what it meant to be God's people. And the exile was the ultimate, judgment from God to his people, where they were sent out from Israel, from Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem, the temple was sort of pulled down and destroyed. And it was like, the heart of what it means to be God's people was destroyed because they had this real attachment to the temple, because that's where God lived. And so the rebuilding that we see through Nehemiah of the temple and of the walls is the restoration of God's people there. And they were to be light to the nations around them. Today, as God's people, we are also called to be light to the people around us. That people would see us, they'd see our lives, they'd see the way we live and interact with one another, and they would go, we want to be like them. We want kind of what they've got because our lives look different. Now, can we reflect that honestly? What are the distinctives from who we are as followers of Jesus to the rest of the people in our world? Are there distinctives, or are we just a lot the same, or we just do something different on Sunday morning? What does it look like for us? So I want us to take a little bit of time, because as I look around the room, I'm sure there's a lot more wisdom in this room than there is in just my head. And so we're going to reflect on this idea of what does it mean for us to be the people of God here in New Plymouth that gives us the distinctive. And we're going to use a scripture to help us sort of navigate that and to sort of identify what that might look like. Because I think coming back to the words of Jesus is always a helpful place for any conversation that we want to have around what it is to be God's people. And so I want to look at a text from Matthew 22. And if you've been around church for a little bit, you'll be familiar with this text. It's the greatest commandment. And of course, the context is that the religious leaders in Jesus' day are trying to trap him. They're trying to get him to trip up, to say something where they go, aha, see, he's not all he's made out to be. And so they come to him with this question that they are sure, and I don't know, they were obviously slow learners because they kept on coming to him with questions that they were sure would trip him up. But every time he managed to give them an answer that where the crowd just went, oh, wow, he is amazing. So they've come to Jesus and they've got this question. They want to get him to sort of trip up, and they go, what is the greatest commandment, Jesus? Now, think about the things, think about, what do you remember about the 10 commandments, right? There's a lot of do nots, right? Do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not covet. There's lots of do nots. And there's often, when we think about God, we can often think about the things that we are called not to do. But when Jesus is asked this question, what is the greatest commandment? He gives a positive response to it. It's a proactive, it's like this is what we are to do, not what we are not to do. So, teacher, what is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Well, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbour as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Out of all the things that Jesus could have pulled out, he didn't pull out a negative, he pulled out a positive. I firmly believe that as followers of Jesus, if we focus on the things that God calls us to be rather than the things he calls us not to be, we will actually honour God far more, and people will kind of go, oh, that's what it is to be followers of Jesus. So we're going to have a conversation around this idea of what it looks like, and we're going to split the room in half. So this side over here, the question for you is, what does it look like for people of Taranaki here at Northpoint to love God with all their heart, soul and mind? And I'm going to be really bold and say you can't say put God first, because that's a given. I want what does putting God first look like? What's an actual response where you might go, this is what it looks like for me to put God first. Okay, so that's the conversation for this side of the room. All right, so in the groups, or if you want to mix them up, you can talk to different people this time and have a chat amongst yourself and get a little bit of feedback. And of course, this is all based in our own experience, what we understand from the Bible, what we understand what it is to be a follower of Jesus. So all sorts of responses are welcome, and we'll listen to what you have to say. So for this side of the room, the question then is, the second part, which is just as important as the first part, is how do we love our neighbour as ourselves? And again, you can't go, you've got to be specific. I couldn't think of a good one off there, but you've got to be specific about what that looks like, tangibles of what it looks like to love our neighbour. That helps us, that would help the world to look at us and kind of go, you live differently to the rest of the world. And what does that look like? Okay? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for that conversation. It's a big conversation to squeeze into 5 minutes, but I know you can do it, all right? And then we're going to come back, we're going to get a bit of feedback and share some collective wisdom that we can then carry away with ourselves, okay? Great, thank you. Make notes where you are, maybe on your phone, as we hear the collective wisdom in the room about what that looks like. So we're going to start off on this side of the room, and then we're going to come over here. So we're going to start off with what does it look like to love God with all our heart, soul and mind. Deborah's agreed to whip around with the microphone. Thank you, Deborah. So what does it look like? Oh, they're tapping Eugene on the arm. Eugene's got the answer. Awesome. Everyone listen, Eugene's going to tell us.
Only one tiny answer. Give God priority in everything in your life. Whatever you do, whatever you say, he has priority over your family, over your children, over everything.
Okay. Does everyone agree with that? It's a pretty rough crowd if they said no, isn't it? So, all right.
We were thinking also to be working on knowing God's ways and his standards for us. So be constantly asking, believing friends, getting into the Word.
Yeah.
Just trying to refine our own understanding of what it means to be righteous.
Yeah. Allowing the Holy Spirit to continue to do that work of refining us in our understanding. Yeah, great.
Letting others first.
Great, thank you. All right. Any otherwise got any burning ideas around what does it look like to love God with all our heart, soul and mind? Yep, over here.
Just sharing and understanding God's peace and being able to display that.
How many of you found it an easy topic to sort of drill down into specifics? No, because we often sit really high level, don't we? Like, we've just got to love God with all that we are. And then when we drill down to what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? All right. No one else got a burning response? Oh, yep, back here. Someone's dobbed someone else in. Joy. Oh, you're all working together. So you've got something to say, Joy?
Honour God, reflecting Jesus, praying, and have grace.
Great, thank you. Oh, Eddie's got one, maybe more than one.
I've only got one. It's an interesting verse that I think we should ponder, because for us to know what God's will is, we need to read the Bible. And here's the verse. It's John 6:63. It says, "It is the Spirit that quickeneth." That word quickeneth means made alive. It is the Spirit that makes alive. The flesh profits nothing, but the words I speak to you, they are spirit and they are life. So the words that Jesus speaks are spirit and they are life, and we can only find them in the Word of God. So,
okay, great, thank you. That ties in with what Len was saying, like learning more about who God is and using scriptures to help us in that, definitely. Okay, so that's that section about how we love God with all that we are. All right, on to this one. How do we love our neighbour as ourselves? Who found this one easy?
Being sincere and transparent as opposed to religious.
Yep. Cool. Thanks. Peter, did you have a response?
Just tell them about the saving action of Jesus on the cross, because that's the only way they're going to get to heaven.
Okay.
It's the little things that matter, so it might be just mowing your neighbour's frontage, but also not sweating the small stuff.
Yep. Cool. Thanks. A couple more down here. One.
It's good to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Notice what's happening around you. You know, they may need your help, and you know, it's just that's the neighbour, whoever is not necessarily next door, but could be on the other side of the world.
Yeah. Yep. Good point.
We had quite a few ideas, but I think one of them that's really important, particularly at work, is not to gossip and bring other people down. And another one we thought about, which is quite an old-fashioned one, was what would Jesus do? Yep. The little sort of bracelets that my children wore.
Yeah.
And it just reminds you, how can you behave differently?
Great. Oh, our sound man's got one.
Over here we talked about how if we accept that everything we have, all our resources and our skills and things come from God, then we should be open-handed with that, and so recognising what other people need. Unfortunately, my children heard this but did not take it on board. We've now got "do not touch" or else on their snack bags.
For me, it's closely tied to do unto others what you would have done unto yourself. So for me, it's the little things like cleaning out your recycling properly, so that the people who are handling the recycling at the recycling centre don't have to deal with dirty recycling.
Okay. Cool.
I just think it's really important to think, just be kind and caring to everyone that crosses your path, no matter what path you're leading, and just be very accepting and open and loving towards others. Everybody deserves a smile and everybody deserves a hug, no matter what they are protruding to you.
Cool. Thanks.
Offering to pray for people that we don't know, basically.
Yeah. Cool.
And just another thought too is to
be able to learn, be able to love yourself so you can love your neighbour as well. Give of yourself, because if you don't love yourself, it's hard to really genuinely give to others.
Yep. Cool. Great. All right. Thank you. There's some really great ideas that we have around what that looks like practical ways. And I guess I just want you to continue to sit with this idea of, just as Nehemiah, the people around Nehemiah rededicated themselves to what it looked like to be God's people after a fall, after the exile, because they wanted to be distinctive to the nations around them. And I guess that's the challenge for us, because we find this, crossover between wanting to connect with people, which means that we want to be open and faithful and not put up barriers. But at the same time, we still need to honour God in the midst of that. And that can be quite a tricky place when we come across people who I don't really agree with what they do or who they are, but we still want to build relationship, right? Because the gospel is relational. That's what Jesus calls us to be. Like, God is relational. He wants us to connect with others. But this idea of how do we maintain our distinctiveness as followers of Jesus, that the rest of the world around us can look and go, oh, this is what makes you different. And reflecting on the words of Jesus, like it's about the things that we do, not necessarily the things that we don't do. Don't get me wrong, I think there are things as Christians that we shouldn't be doing. But if our focus is always on the negative, we tend to become negative people. Whereas if we can focus on the affirmation of what God calls us to be, then we will become the kind of people that others want to be around. I remember teaching my son to ride a bike, and we were moving from training wheels to, no training wheels, and which often involved me running behind, holding the seat while he's going along. And there was this big bike path out in the middle of a paddock, but there was this power pole just to the side. And as I was kind of let go, I said, don't hit the pole. And of course, all he could think about was the pole. So where did he end up going? Towards the pole. And I'm trying to catch up to him going, don't hit the pole. And so sometimes when we focus on the negative, when we focus on the things that we think, oh, this isn't what we should be doing, that's all we can think about. When I think what God calls us to is to actually be thinking about the things that we should be doing. How do we love God with all that we are? And it's a big question. We weren't flooded with responses of going, this is what it looks like, because it's a deep question. How do we do that? What are the tangible things that we do that reflect that we love God? The people of Israel, they had it easy because they just had a big list of rules and regulations that God said, this is what it looks like to love me. Whereas we kind of sit under the grace banner and we kind of like, oh, well, there's freedom and all sorts of things, and but there's still, I guess, a place for us to go, well, what is it to be the children of God here and now? And the idea of how do we love our neighbour, right? How do we do that in a way which honours God and blesses our neighbour, lifts them up, encourages them towards the things of God, while being connected in that way, while still maintaining our distinctive. Oh, this is who we are as followers of Jesus, so I choose this over other things. Anyway, ideas to sit with and continue to ponder through the rest of your day. I encourage you to have conversations at home. What does it look like for you as a family to embrace some of this? I guess this is part of our goal of the lifelong journey of the Christian, loving God with all that we are and loving our neighbour as ourselves. And so it should be a regular conversation that we have with one another. How are we going with that? What does that look like? I'm going to invite the team back up. We're going to wrap up with one more song. But thanks for your engagement. Thanks for taking a risk and having those conversations, because sometimes you're not always sure what the other person is going to say when you kind of go, what do you think about this? So thank you for being a little bit vulnerable and sharing your ideas with one another. Thanks.